Well, all this movement was going on militarily in both the South Pacific and North Africa and Italy. Germany had set up a systematic process of rounding up Jews from all throughout Europe in a matter of cleansing. And by cleansing, I mean killing them. So, what you have here is the Holocaust. That's what I'm referring to. During the time of the Holocaust, 6 million Jews were exterminated. These people were gassed, they were put into ovens, they were shot on sight by firing squad, they were placed into very cramped conditions with hardly any food or water, if any at all, amidst intense amount of illness, the threat of violence, the threat of death, the threat of torture. 6 million Jews were exterminated brutally by the Nazi regime. Wasn't just Jews, too. There were about 4 million others that were also likewise exterminated. Typical targets for the Nazis would be homosexuals, um, some of the Polish, some of the people who may be disabled and otherwise incapable of defending themselves. And they were indiscriminate against these people, men, women, and children. If you fit any of these categories, you were targeted by the Nazi regime. And so it wasn't as if these people voluntarily listened to somebody, oh, let me just go on vacation to Auschwitz. It wasn't anything like that. The Nazis set up a specific regime to target and find Jews and these other people for way of extermination. And the rationale was behind it is something that we have talked about in previous chapters. Hitler's belief in the superiority of the Aryan race had a large part to do with it. And he believed in eugenics. So the whole eugenics factor of those being lesser peoples ought to be stopped was stemmed from the idea also now of eradicating and exterminating the Jewish people from the world. Adolf Hitler blamed Jews for their economic struggles after World War I. And he wanted to punish them by cleansing them from Europe in particular, hopefully maybe elsewhere upon his thought. Otherwise, though, Adolf Hitler's brutal cleansing and extermination of the Jewish people is the most despicable act of hatred that I personally can imagine. I cannot imagine the violence, the torture, the terror, the unimaginable, brutal ways and just grotesque and disgusting and awful ways that the Nazis went about killing people indiscriminately because they fit a certain profile that they did not believe in. That's how the tenets of eugenics can be taken to further extremes by awful people like Adolf Hitler, and then to have them specifically set in motion for cleansing and extermination in brutal fashion. That was the Holocaust. And so while it had become known that this was happening, the Allies understand, as brutal as that is and as awful as that is, we have bigger fish to fry at this moment. We need to take down the Nazis in order to be able to eventually help these folks during the Holocaust and release all these people at all these various different prison camps, Auschwitz and otherwise. We have to be able to take the German military first. So it's not as if the United States and Britain didn't recognize that this is going on and just haphazardly just threw it by the wayside. They just saw a bigger priority at that very moment. Otherwise, though, the Holocaust is one of the great atrocities in world history. Eventually, Allies would liberate Holocaust survivors from their war camps. The Soviets, the Americans, and the Brits would eventually encounter that. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But otherwise, though, for me in particular, what shocks me is that there are some people in this world who deny that the Holocaust ever happened. For whatever reason, there are people from many different corners who deny that 6 million Jews were brutally exterminated, that they weren't specifically targeted by the Nazi regime. I have never quite understood why people would systematically deny this ever happened. Some people have various different beliefs and reasons why, none of which make any sort of sense to me. But this is not naysay. This happened, and it was very brutal. To this day, there are people who survived their time in a Holocaust prison camp, many of whom live in the United States. They exist to this day. They have the scars, tattoos, and markings to bear it. It did happen.